It feels like every day something new comes up in regards to the Yoshi and the Mysterious Book discourse that makes the criticisms of this game more and more ridiculous. I've been saying from the very beginning that this game looks very great. It looks interesting. It looks like a lot of fun. And now that I've gotten through a good chunk of it, I still have not beaten it. This is the best game of the year so far, for sure. It mogs the shit out of something like Pragmata or any of these other AAA games that the industry has tried to shill. This is a really truly innovative, inventive little title that kind of came out of nowhere. And there's lots of reasons for this, and there's lots of reasons this game was dismissed initially. But one of the things that I honestly, genuinely believed for a good chunk of the runtime was this idea that this game only had 6 chapters. Because this was something that, like, all the reviews said. You had full playthroughs that cleared the game in about 6 hours, right? You had, like, everyone was, like, coming out and agreeing that, like, yeah, the credits roll after 6 hours. That is an extremely misleading statement, because although it is true that there are credits that play after World 6, after you do everything in World 6, there are actually more worlds after that. There is a significant chunk of the game left after the credits roll initially. This game has a true ending. So all those people who were putting up their reviews day one and saying they kept playing the game until they beat it and kept saying that, like, the game was about 6 hours long, that it only had 6 worlds, they were completely and totally wrong. Not only is there 10 worlds total, not only does the game keep going after the credits roll, not only is there a ton of additional content, the content itself is a lot more in-depth and elaborate than I think a lot of people who rush through the game initially realize. This game has a rather robust achievement system in which you have to explore each and every level, nook and cranny, interacting with the environment in every single possible way to understand the features and the ecology of the setting. You are learning everything there is to learn about these creatures and about all the things you can do with them. And a lot of it is pretty convoluted and ridiculous. There have been times where I've had to, like, unite a bunch of creatures into one area, or just, like, having to do something fringe or ridiculous. Like, you have to, like, you make all sorts of weird discoveries throughout the game. Like, this isn't really the kind of game that you can blow through. In fact, as I play through the game, I've noticed that, like, there are a lot of times where I clear the stage pretty quickly, but in doing so, you miss out on a lot of features that aren't readily apparent. This is not a traditional 2D platformer game. This is more of a sandbox title. And it's a sandbox title in which you won't necessarily find everything on your first trip to an area. And as a result of that, like, the game has a lot more replay value and longevity than I think a lot of people are expecting. Princess Peach Showtime, which came from Goodfield a couple of years back, that was about, like, 6 hours long, and it did have, like, some completionist stuff. It did have some achievements. It was not as robust as this, though. Like, this seems like, to me, that doing everything in this game is going to take, like, quite a long while. I'm like, we're like, what, like 4 days in now, and I still haven't beaten it. And it's true that, like, I haven't been putting a lot of time into the game or anything, but, like, the simple fact of the matter is, we were fed straight up lies about this game. Like, we were told that the game ended after 6 worlds, and that was the end of it. And you had all these YouTube playthroughs, like, insisting it was true. You had all these YouTube coverage insisting it was true. People saw the credits, immediately ended their playtime, and then, like, immediately made their, like, final impressions video. When in actuality, there's quite a bit more to the game after that. And this is kind of a reoccurring problem with the community, because I said the same thing when, like, Donkey Kong Bonanza Emerald Rush came out. is that day one, we had a lot of people saying the DLC was overpriced, that it wasn't worth the price of admission, that there wasn't a lot to do in it, that it was kind of a lazy expansion that should have been the base game. But like in actuality, Emerald Rush is actually quite a bit longer than the base game. Like Emerald Rush is like fantastic. I actually like it more than the base game. And that's not, but that wasn't something that you would have realized if you hadn't played the game extensively. Like, we have guys rushing to make video content on these games before anyone else. And as a result of that, we're seeing like a lot of incorrect information being pushed out there to the mainstream. And we've seen this happen several times over the past several years. It's not just about like how well these games sell, or like, whether or not like they have an audience or not anymore. Like, we're being straight up told by these critics, by these reviewers, that games like this have significantly less content and features than they actually do. Like, before this game was released to the public, people thought this was going to be a middling 2D platformer, when in actuality, it's one of the best games Good Feels ever put out, if not the best. So when you take all that into consideration, like, this is a glaring example of just how gaming YouTubers can't be relied on to give factual information about major new Nintendo releases. Like, they are anxious to get the next big viral video. They are anxious to get their video out before anyone else, and they will make incorrect statements in order to like get their video out and try and generate some clickbait. It's very easy to forget that when Pokemon Legends ZA came out, that there was like a huge rush of people saying the game was broken, and that it didn't look good, that it was a disappointment, that it was glitchy. And like, considering how popular that game ended up becoming, considering how it's become like iconic in the community, and like probably one of the better stories in Pokemon, and another shining example of why the Legend subseries is so great, I find myself like very, very surprised at just how the general community has like kind of moved on from that. Like, people just haven't noticed that all the clickbait, all the rage bait, all like the weird statements about ZA, like, they just haven't panned out at all. Like, everybody was happy with ZA. Like, the game's a huge hit, but you wouldn't have known that going by the initial reception to it. And now, not only that, it's one of the best-selling games on Switch too. Like, Legend ZA was a huge success, but we were told otherwise by the community initially. And now we're seeing the same thing happen to Yoshi and the Mysterious Book, where this is clearly going to be a fairly solid Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive, right? It's not going to be the best selling, but like, it's pretty solid. This might go on to be the all-time best selling Yoshi game. This may like spell a new golden age for the character. It may like, catapult Good Feel into like, household name status. Like, this game is a big deal in a lot of cases, but because of the YouTube community, we didn't realize that until after the game was already out. Like, because so many people were so adamant trying to take the Nintendine strategy of criticizing everything Nintendo does for views, trying to do that method. They've just completely misrepresented what this game actually is. They have completely lied about this game and what it offers. One of the things I've seen in regards to games like this is this idea that like, oh, it's not going to move systems. It's not a system seller, and that's what the Switch 2 desperately needs right now. It needs to sell more systems, and it's like, it's so out of touch and ridiculous, because the Switch 2 has already sold systems. It has a pretty healthy player base. Sales are going up all the time. Sales are good. And we're getting more and more games. Like, we don't need more system sellers. Like, what we need is more games like this that offer a healthy variety of experiences for the player base. Now, I would say Yoshi and the Mysterious Book is not a game for everyone. And I think that's something that a lot of people who review this game have emphasized pretty strongly, is that this is not a game for everyone. But at the same time, that's actually what makes it good and appealing. This is the thing that, like, people like this don't understand. Like, they complain endlessly about how every game is the same and how it's the same thing over and over again and how everything's made for the lowest common denominator. They don't really think about the opposite end of the coin, right? Like, if you make a game for a specific audience, if you try and go out there, if you try and make something wholly unique and original, like, what you end up doing is that you end up alienating everybody who just wants to, like, drive around in Forza Horizon 6, okay? Yoshi and the Mysterious Book not trying to be like Forza Horizon 6 is a very good thing. But, like, for a lot of people, I've seen a lot of people say that because Yoshi is nothing like Forza Horizon 6 or The Last of Us or, like, um, Call of Duty, that this is somehow like a failed game, that, like, it's only going to sell a handful of copies and that it's not going to leave much of an impression on anyone. And that's a mindset that we really have to move past, right? If we truly want games to, like, expand beyond the lowest common denominator, we have to understand what that actually means. Is that you're going to have to take risks, you're going to have to produce things that may not be appealing to people on a superficial level, and start, like, creating, like, original projects that kind of defy people's expectations. And I think in a lot of ways, Yoshi and the Mysterious Book is the best example of that we've gotten on Switch 2 so far. Because last year we got a lot of pretty safe releases. We got Mario Kart World, we got Donkey Kong Bonanza, we got a sequel to Kirby Air Ride, we got Pokemon, Prime 4 came out, Tamagotchi, Pokepia is a Pokemon game. In a lot of ways, this is the biggest risk Nintendo has taken on Switch 2 in a long time. This is like a really shining example of just how Nintendo isn't scared to innovate and, like, do something wild and creative with their iconic brands. It's very interesting looking at the criticism of this game, because the overwhelming consensus initially was that it was never going to be as good as Yoshi's Island. But the simple fact of the matter is that these are two radically different games that are appealing for radically different reasons. Like, just because they both have Yoshi in them doesn't make them lazy. It doesn't make them, like, bad. It doesn't make them low quality. Like, if anything, the differences make them both worth playing if you're a hardcore fan of Nintendo and the character. And this is this is the this is the really interesting thing about gaming. This is what hardcore gaming fans should be enthusiastic about, is that these kinds of experimental games are just killing it on Nintendo platforms right now. I know traditionally the narrative has been that, like, AAA games are stagnant and boring and that independent games are dominating. Like, when you look at the indie game scene today, what you end up with is a bunch of clones of, like, old Nintendo games. You get, like, a Wario Land, like, knockoff. You get Advance Wars. You get like several Star Fox knockoffs. Like, and then meanwhile, in the actual Nintendo ecosystem, we're getting games like this and Donkey Kong Bonanza, games that no indie dev would ever be able to recreate in a million years. It's amazing to me how the Switch 2 has done as well as it has, how it's sold as many units as it has, how many games are on the console and are all doing really, really well. And yet we're still in that early phase of fanboys delusionally denying that Nintendo is successful. Like, you have Nintendine, like, desperately trying to cope whenever Nintendo, like, announces anything or confirms anything, and, like, we're reaching the point where, like, that just isn't going to be possible. For too long, people have been, like, complaining about, like, the stock price, and they've been complaining about the games, and they've been complaining about the lack of a direct. I feel like people are going to be very, very blindsided when Nintendo finally does make the big new reveals and finally confirm what's going to come out in the next year or so of the console. I feel like people are going to be very, very surprised at just how all of their copes are going to fall apart just instantly. Like, I've been seeing people lately try and say that Donkey Kong Bonanza has underperformed, which is, like, obviously ridiculous if you think about it for 2 seconds, because Mario Odyssey did not sell as much as it did overnight, right? This is like a staple Switch game that's going to be an evergreen title that's probably going to sell indefinitely. And Bonanza's in the same boat. Super Mario Party Jamboree is in the same boat. Breath of the Wild's in the same boat. Actually, Breath of the Wild sales have gone up this quarter. And the narrative has always been like, well, that's because Tears of the Kingdom is so bad. But like, you do realize that the more people that buy Breath of the Wild, they're gonna instantly move on to Tears next, right? Like after they're done with it. It's like you don't know how this works. So like again, we're in this era of people delusionally denying the reality of the situation they're in that there are so many Nintendo games to play, there's so much coming out in so many different genres with so many different characters and styles and presentations from so many different developers. It's pretty much impossible to ever be bored with a Nintendo console unless you're straight up just like trying not to enjoy it. If you're straight up just refusing to play certain games from certain developers, from certain franchises, like that's just the reality of what we're seeing here now. Like I can't imagine you have even a passing interest in video games and would not be interested in a Nintendo console. I'm not saying this because Yoshi and the Mysterious Book is like, probably the best game of the year so far. I'm saying this because like there are so many games available on Nintendo platforms that are of similar or even higher quality, right? Like we're not starving for new releases. Okay, we're not starving for new games to play. Like games like the Yoshi and the Mysterious Book are killing it, but it's far from the only thing to play on the platform. Like even now, as I record this, I'm anxious to get back into playing Tales of Arise, that launched on Switch 2 the day after Yoshi and the Mysterious Book. But, because I just finished Berseria, I'm not in a huge hurry to play it, even though I'm really anxious to do it. Like that's a really good example of the situation we're in now, right? The situation I've been in for the past year, as I like slowly make my way through all these Tales games and try to clear them all and try to beat them and try to like establish myself as a Tales connoisseur. Like this is like how I'm spending my time is just playing a ton of old Tales games. And that's just me, Other people will like find other series or other things they're interested in. You're gonna have people playing Star Fox for the first time or Splatoon Raiders, in July or like Rhythm Heaven. Like there's just so many games coming out all the time that like we're long past the point where we can doom post about Nintendo Switch 2. This is Harman Smith. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. Thank you.